So a little bit ago, I actually made a video where I talked about who I think should be the main villain of the new Marvel Spider-Man 4 movie. And I kind of went in depth of like who I think is most likely, but also who I want to see and kind of combine those. And yeah, I put it in that one video. So I thought, you know what? I feel like I have a pretty knowledgeable sense on Batman. Of course, Matt Reeves' The Batman. Again, it's one of my all-time favorite movies. So I thought, you know what? Let's, try and cook and create here and use that idea for that Spider-Man video for this, the Batman Part 2 video, and kind of guess who I think will be the main villain of the Batman Part 2, and also talk about it in sense of like who I want to be the villain of the Batman Part 2, and combine that with who I think makes sense to be the villain of the Batman Part 2. Now, before I do get into all that and more, though, I would just like to say there's still a decent amount of you guys who watch these videos who are not yet subscribed to the channel. So if you could do me a massive favor and leave a like on this video to, of course, let me know you guys enjoy it. Subscribe to the channel for the latest movie news and movie content, all of the above. And I guess we'll get straight into it with the number 5 option on who I think is most likely to be the villain of the Batman Part 2. Now, I've got this option as the number 5 because even though I think it is pretty likely and still more likely than a lot of the villains that some people have suggested, I still think that there's still about probably 4 villains who I think will probably come before this one. But it's really hard to tell because a lot of people know that this guy is going to be a villain in the movie, but it's hard to know, is he going to be the main one? And of course, at number 5, I do actually have the Penguin. Now, a couple of you guys probably just laughed at your screen and clicked off the video and said, how the hell can the Penguin be the main villain of the Batman Part 2? But obviously, if you have seen the show, you would know it is legitimately one of the best, well, I think it's one of the best TV shows I have personally ever seen. Easily the best superhero or, of course, DC, Marvel character TV show I have ever seen by far. It is absolutely insane. And for the most part in that show, they build, the Penguin into being just the guy who runs a club in the first movie to becoming one of the biggest crime bosses in Gotham, to the point where at the end of the episode, he's basically crushed out every bit of competition. He essentially, when he wants to, he can now rule the crime business of Gotham. Again, I think having him as the main villain of the Batman Part 2, especially now that he's had his own show to completely set him up, would be a really interesting thing. The only issue with that is there are rumors that the Penguin is actually going to have a smaller role in the Batman Part 2, and Colin Farrell won't actually have as big of a role that he had in the Batman that he will have in the Batman Part 2, which I thought was a little bit confusing considering he just had his own TV show that was absolutely massive, and Matt Reeves seems to be in love with this Penguin character played by Colin Farrell. I just think that there is a chance that a lot of people wouldn't think he'd be the main villain, but I still think there's a massive chance that he low-key could, and they would introduce like another side villain or two similar to him in the first movie who would be set up to be the main villain of the third one. Again, I don't really know how they're going to go about that, but considering those leaks that he would have a smaller role were like half a year old now, and Matt Reeves is like still finishing the script, I don't know if those leaks are completely true, and I still think there's a chance we see the Penguin being the main villain of this movie, and Batman having to deal with what happened in the Penguin show and the massive crime scene that the Penguin is going to create in the future. Again, at number 4 though, I have the Court of Owls, and I know a lot of people would have these guys a little bit higher, but I just think that there is a massive chance that they get introduced in this movie and are more so the villain of the third one, because as we know, you have to put a lot of time into the Court of Owls, and I don't think they're just something you can set up like that. You're probably going to have to give them some time, and even though we had little hints of them in the Penguin show, I still think, there is a big chance, though, they are the main villains of the Batman Part 2. And for those of you who don't know who the Court of Owls are, basically they're this underground secret government society like the Illuminati or some shit, who essentially are basically creating all the rules and are creating all the havoc and corruption that, of course, plagues Gotham. And they're doing all of that behind the scenes. And when Batman starts to find out about them, they essentially send these things called Talons after Batman, which are basically these really, really high-level secret society assassins who try and kill Batman. Again, I think with the corruption that has been set up in the government of the first Batman movie, we could really see that go more and more in depth in this second one, even more in depth maybe in the third one, with this Court of Owls, who are basically creating all the corruption and, you know, lies in the government that we see in the Gotham world, and we see the Batman, of course, try and stop them. So I think they're of course a big chance. At number 3, though, I do have Mr. Freeze, who I toss and turn on whether or not I think he's a big chance for this movie or not, because realistically, I think personally he's more of a fantastical villain who should probably be saved for James Gunn's, you know, DCU universe, which of course is going to be very fantastical, and I think would probably fit more so in those movies rather than these Matt Reeves grounded movies. But in saying that, we know that DC, there is a chance that a couple of these villains get turned back, like the Court of Owls, because they aren't really anywhere near as popular in the comic books, and DC just say, look, we like the idea of having the Court of Owls maybe as a side villain or something like that, but you need to have a really big marketable main villain. And that's where they might go with a guy like Mr. Freeze, who isn't realistic, but don't get me wrong, there are still some unrealistic things we've seen in like the Batman, and I think you could kind of make a Mr. Freeze in this, you know, grounded Batman universe, especially the part of the story where his wife is, you know, frozen. He's trying to come up with a cure to save what she has. Again, they could easily put that in a grounded reality, which is the Batman. I just don't know how they would go with like the ice gun and whatnot. But other than him as a character, his backstory and how, you know, and his problems that he has, you could easily do that in a grounded Batman film. So I think marketing wise and popularity wise, he's probably the choice that, you know, DC execs would love, and they would probably smell more money with Mr. Freeze than they would be able to smell more money with villains like the Penguin and the Court of Owls. But at the same time, he just doesn't really fit in this Matt Reeves Batman universe. And I think you can still have villains like Court of Owls and a couple others I'm going to talk about in a second, which don't, you know, which can be just marketed by Matt Reeves being a great director and creating great movies in the first place. So I think Mr. Freeze is a good chance. And number 2, though, we've got one that a lot of people really don't want, but I think could be really likely to be the main villain of the Batman Part 2. And this is also another hear me out pick by me, but that actually does happen to be the Joker. Now, some of you guys might have just thought, well, we have had so much Joker content. He's been the main villain of The Dark Knight. He was in Suicide Squad. He's had 2 movies. All of the above. Why do we need more Joker? But at the end of the day, what we saw in the Batman and the deleted scene of Joker kind of serving as Hannibal Lecter, in terms of Batman is quite literally going up to him in that deleted scene to get advice on him, or from him, sorry, on how to deal with the Riddler and the corruption, and see what the Joker, of course, knows. Again, I very much think that that scene was possibly deleted because they might base that in whole entire scene and turn that into the whole entire plot of the Batman Part 2. And what I mean by that is the Batman might regularly go to the Joker throughout the whole entire movie and ask him about clues and, of course, news and information about the other villain potentially of this movie, which I think could be, at number 1, Hush. And Hush is, of course, the guy that I think a lot of people really want to see as this main villain of the Batman Part 2. I want to see him as the main villain. And essentially, as we know, he is an Elliot, more specifically Thomas Elliot, with his dad being Edward Elliot. And Thomas Elliot, who is Hush, is essentially a character who was childhood friends with, of course, Bruce Wayne. The Elliots are a really, really rich family, and in the Penguin, they actually had, I believe, a highway that had the name Elliot on the sign. And of course, that was the highway that got completely destroyed in the flood. Again, the Elliots are a really rich, powerful family. And in the comics, Thomas was actually, I wouldn't say jealous, but he actually wanted his family's wealth. So he actually cut the brake line of his parents' car, causing a crash that killed, of course, his father. And he, of course, wanted, independence, and he wanted their wealth. And as we know, that ended up leading to him, being put in jail and whatnot. And then, of course, he would become Hush later on, basically a surgeon who can change his appearance. And again, is extremely jealous and angry of course, his opposite to him, which is Bruce Wayne, who didn't end up going to jail, and he ended up inheriting his family's wealth. And as we know, he absolutely hates Bruce Wayne. It's a motive for him to go after Bruce Wayne, maybe even find out that, of course, he's Batman. I don't know how they're going to go about that story, but end of the day, Hush could be doing these absolutely diabolical things behind the scenes. Batman's trying to figure out who Hush is, and he's maybe going up to Joker to get advice and learn whatever the Joker knows about him. Basically meaning that even though Hush is technically the main villain, it's almost like Joker is the main villain as well, as because he's as important to this story as what Hush is. And I don't know, maybe at the end of it, of course, we see Batman might promise that he can get him out or something if he helps him, but maybe at the end of it, Batman just leaves him in Arkham. Joker potentially finds a way to escape Arkham, and that gives him a motive to, of course, come after Batman, maybe in the third movie or something like that. Again, I don't know how they're going to play this, but I just have a feeling we're going to have two main villains of this Batman Part 2 movie, and I think it's going to be Joker, who's locked up in Arkham, basically feeding information to Batman in return for something, and Batman, of course, going after Hush behind the scenes. Again, that's my pick for the two main villains. I think the Penguin will have some type of thing to do with the story, but I don't know if he'll be the main. And yeah, maybe they introduce the Court of Owls in the background. Again, I know that sounds like a lot, but in the first movie, we had, Falcone, the Penguin, Riddler, Catwoman. They were all literally introduced in the first movie. Don't be surprised if in this second one, we get 100 of those villains introduced. I think it'd actually be really good to potentially see. But again, if you haven't already, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for the latest gaming content, movie content, all of the above. Don't forget to comment your thoughts and opinions on this all down below. Who do you guys want to see as the main villain of the Batman Part 2? Do you guys think it should be Hush, Joker, maybe even the Penguin? Again, I'd very much like to know. Again, subscribe to my sports channel and my IRL/long channels, which will also be getting linked in the description down below. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.